And we are live. Welcome, everybody. We are going to give just a minute for everyone to kind of trickle in. I should have just received an email from Drew here going out just saying we're starting. So we're going to give it just a second. I am broadcasting today from Idaho. And as always, Idaho weather is giving us some tricks. And so Wi Fi may go down. Drew is here to carry us all the way through. But today is our BarnTalk site layout webinar. We're going to be going through different variations of sites that you could have, multiple barns, pig farms. We got poultry farms. And so we're going to kind of cover the gambit here. We're going to go through a couple different scenarios, and Drew's going to walk us through all the different hardware setups that you can do with the Barn Tools, Barn Talk system, and we are going to go to that point. Also, we have our trade show schedule that we'll be covering. So if you have any plans in the upcoming months to go to any of these trade shows, we'd love to connect with you there. And then also at the end of this webinar, we'll throw up some of Drew's email contact information so that if you do have any questions and you'd like to get started on getting your system implemented at your site, we can definitely carry this conversation off of the webinar today and get you set up. So without further ado, I will turn the time over to Drew and I will hop in if we have any other questions. Also, if you do have questions throughout this presentation, don't forget that we do have the commenting feature. So if you're watching today on YouTube or Facebook, just go into the comments that you see below, type in any questions, and then I can launch those on the screen at any point, and Drew can answer those live. So if you do have questions, don't be shy. Just don't hesitate to go hop in there and throw those up. So I will turn the time over to Drew.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelton. Appreciate that. And thank you guys all for joining us here today. Hope your 2023 is off to a good start. If you've joined us before for some of these webinars that we've done, thank you for being here again today. Some of these past webinars that we've done, we've kind of gone over different demo and tour of our mobile app. We're going to get a little bit more technical on how BarnTalk can be set up on specific farms today. So if this is your first time joining us for a webinar and you're still looking for a little bit more of general information or how our mobile app works, I'd invite you to go check out our YouTube channel, which will have some of those past webinars there and give you an idea of that. So please do check those out. Like Kelton talked about, want to just start briefly by going over some of the trade shows that the Barn Tools team is going to be at this winter. So starting next week, we're going to be up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota at the South Dakota Pork Congress. And then later in January, part of our team will be down at the IPPE Poultry Show in Atlanta. Some of us will be at the Iowa Pork Congress in Des Moines. And then looking into next month, starting off there, we've got a couple shows in both Ohio in Lima as well as in Illinois at Springfield. So if you're going to be in the area or planning to attend those shows, here's the information where our booths will be set up. And we'll have folks there from Barn Tools that would love to stop by, have you stop by and chat with us there, ask questions about, how BarnTalk would look on your farm. We'll have some swag there to give out to folks as well. So don't hesitate to swing by, say hi. And we'd love to chat with you guys more about BarnTalk and what we can provide for you on your farm. So diving in a little bit before we get into some of these site layouts, just kind of wanted to briefly go over kind of some of the sensors and things like that you'll see on these different layouts. So starting with our BarnTalk gateway, that's the brains of the BarnTalk alarm system. That's what provides connectivity for the system. That BarnTalk gateway is going to go connect to any cellular network in your area. That box is certified to work on multiple different carriers, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile. So, we will find whatever service is strongest in your area to connect to. And then those are some of the sensors that we have available today, monitoring things like indoor temperature, outdoor temperature, humidity. Our wireless dry contact sensor is really a utility sensor. You can use that for monitoring virtually anything that's powered. A lot of folks will hook that up to backup generators, monitor power wirelessly, connect that into their feed systems that will notify you if your feed line times out. And then one of our really popular sensors is our wireless water meters. Definitely gives you the ability to keep an eye on real-time water consumption in your facilities. That's always such a good indicator of the health of the animals on your farm, as if they're drinking enough water. Obviously, it allows you to keep an eye on if something happens with water lines, if they burst or spring a leak or something like that. You can see those trends in water consumption, in past days or weeks in the BarnTalk mobile app. So that's kind of these are the kind of sensors we're going to be talking about as we go through some of these different layout options as we go through this today. So I'm going to start with a few different layouts that we commonly see on swine farms. So I know that every farm is a little bit different on the setup and where controllers and how many different rooms and buildings there are on farms, but these are going to be the most common layouts that we see when we talk to customers across the industry today. So in Iowa and in the Midwest, probably one of the most common setups we see is a 2,500 head double wide finishing barn. All right. And so that in most cases will have two different rooms, but even if it has just one room, this is how we would lay that out. If that barn has got a loadout room or office where your ventilation controllers are, you'll see there, that's where we would recommend installing the BarnTalk gateway. Okay, so because that gateway box is there, it's going to monitor power where it's plugged in. And then that gateway also has two dry contact inputs built into it. And so we can connect that to different things like water pressure sensors. We can connect that to your ventilation controllers. So if your controllers throw alarms, we can pick that up there. And then you'll see that in the barn, we've got a temperature sensor for each room, a wireless humidity sensor for each room. And then we've also got a few wireless dry contact sensors that would be placed for feed line monitoring. So if your feed lines time out, you can get a notification for that. Depending on how your farm is set up, you might only need one of those per room, or you need two of them. Just depends on how many feed lines you have. The thing to make sure to look at when you're looking at wireless dry contact for feed lines is that each of those sensors can technically do three different things. It can monitor power where it's plugged in, and then each sensor has two dry contact inputs built into it. So in some cases, you might be able to connect two different feed lines into that one wireless dry contact sensor, or you can just connect, one feed line into each sensor. So that would kind of be why we have that layout there. The other thing you'll notice is we have a wireless water meter that is monitoring consumption for this entire site on this particular layout. So that's kind of giving you a good idea of how or what all of those different sensors are doing for a 2,400 head double wide finishing barn. Now, if we look at a layout where we would have two 1,200 head barn or 2,400 head barns side by side, we've got a connecting hallway in between there with an office. You'll see how we would recommend laying that site out is we're going to likely have 2 ventilation controllers, right? One controller running this barn, the other controller running this barn. So in this case, we put our gateway box located here. It's going to monitor power there. Like we talked about, those dry contact inputs in that gateway box would be able to connect to that ventilation controller if that's what we wanted to use those for. And then we would use a wireless dry contact sensor to be able to connect to the ventilation controller for our other barn. You'll also see that each one of these barns has got 2 different rooms in it. So we're going to put a wireless temp sensor in each one of those rooms. And then we're going to put a water meter, depending on where you would want to plumb into that water line, that would monitor water consumption for each one of those rooms. So it just depends to, maybe your water manifold or your water tree is located in this connecting hallway or in this office here. They could be there as well. But that just goes to show you that, you can monitor water for each individual barn with this particular layout. You could also get more granular than that if you would like to monitor water consumption for each individual room. You would be able to add a water meter for each one of those. The gateway itself can connect up to 24 wireless sensors. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what kind of capacity we're able to have from a wireless sensor standpoint. Obviously, on this particular layout, we have a lot of capacity to add additional sensors onto this system. Here would be another situation where we would have 2 barns. In this case, we wouldn't have a connecting hallway, but we would still be able to run both of these barns off of one gateway communication box. So in this case, we're going to put a gateway box in one of those barns. In that control room area, we've got a wireless water meter that's going to monitor water consumption for this barn. In our other barn, where the gateway box is not located, we would use a wireless dry contact sensor that would be able to monitor power supply for that barn. You would also be able to connect that to a water pressure sensor or ventilation controller there. You can also see we're going to put a wireless temperature sensor in each room for these particular barns, as well as use our wireless dry contact sensors here to be able to monitor our feed lines. So again, this might not be exactly how your barn's laid out, but there's certainly a lot of facilities that are set up this way, and that gives you an idea of some of the possible equipment and hardware that you could utilize on that particular layout. Here's another example of where we would have 3 barns located side by side, not connected. And then we would have an office, in this case up here, where you maybe would have a water pump or well pump to be able to supply water, or maybe that's where your electrical and utilities come into. In this case, that's where we would want to install our BarnTalk gateway. It's going to monitor power from that standpoint. If you do have a pressure sensor in there for monitoring whether your well is pumping water, we would be able to integrate that into the dry contacts in that BarnTalk gateway. And then in each one of those barns, you can see we've got a wireless water meter, a wireless temperature sensor. In this case, we've got a wireless humidity sensor as well. And then these wireless dry contact sensors, which are going to be connected to our feed lines. Again, we would be able to monitor not only the feed lines if they are timing out from that standpoint, but because those sensors also have the ability to monitor power, we're able to not only monitor power in this office building here where that gateway is, but we're able to monitor power within each one of those buildings as well. So that gives you an idea of how you would be able to connect that up on that particular site. As Kelton said at the beginning of this webinar, if you guys have any questions at any time, please feel free to put those in the chat, and I'll be able to answer those live as we go through this. So if you have particular questions for your specific farm or how your buildings are laid out, don't hesitate to put those in the chat, and we'll get to those. So if we look at this next layout, this would be a little bit more complex of a layout, like a sow farm, for example. So in this particular instance, we have 5 total buildings that, we're going to be monitoring. So this long building here that's running north and south, that would appear to be where our farrowing rooms are located. And so we're going to have a gateway box there that's going to monitor power. And then we've got a wireless temperature sensor in each one of those rooms, as well as a wireless water meter that's going to be monitoring water consumption for that entire farrowing barn. In this case, we're also going to have a gateway box to connect to these 2 buildings, and a gateway communication box to connect to these 2 buildings. So our best recommendation when it comes to how many gateways do I need for how many buildings, in most cases from a swine standpoint, 1 gateway box can monitor up to 3 different buildings. And again, some of that depends on what you have for building materials, if they're, steel walls, or if you have curtains. Curtain-sided barns are a little more forgiving for those wireless sensor signals to be able to go through, as compared to panel walls or steel on the side of those. So it kind of depends on your particular situation. But you'll notice here that we're able to monitor power in literally every single one of these barns with the gateway box in these 3 buildings, and then using that wireless dry contact sensor in those buildings where we don't have gateway boxes. We're able to monitor power from that standpoint. And the same thing, like I said earlier, you can use those dry contact inputs to monitor different things like ventilation controllers, water pressure sensors, whatever you're looking for in that particular instance. But typically on sow farm layouts where we have more buildings, we need multiple gateways to be able to handle the connectivity for those particular situations. I do want to briefly go back to this 3-barn layout and just mention something as it relates to connectivity for those wireless sensors. In this case, because we have 3 different buildings that are on this layout, that gateway box comes with 2 external antennas. And those 2 antennas are physically interchangeable. It doesn't matter which one gets connected to which port on that gateway, but one of those antennas is going to go find the cellular network to provide the connectivity for the BarnTalk alarm system. The other antenna is going to communicate with the wireless sensors that are placed throughout the farm. So on layouts and in situations where you have multiple buildings, the best practice is to make sure both of those antennas are placed on the outside of the building where your gateway box is located. That's going to provide you with, 1, getting that cellular antenna outside, a strong cellular connection for your alarm system, and 2, with that sensor antenna outside, that's going to give a better line of sight to all of those different wireless sensors on your farm to make sure that there's strong connectivity between your gateway box and your wireless sensors. So that's something to keep in mind. Anytime you have a site with multiple buildings, make sure you get those antennas outside. And we provide some mounting brackets to get those antennas mounted on the outside of buildings. So that way you can, get good line of sight for that. In most cases, the wireless sensors have the ability to connect within a 700-800 foot range of that gateway box, and that's a little dependent on how many different barriers that sensor signal is traveling through. But that's kind of our best recommendation from that standpoint. Wide open, nothing in between it. That sensor can reach to that gateway box about 1,000 to 1,200 feet. But when we start putting building materials in there, that shrinks that down a little bit more to like 700 feet. So something to keep in mind. As I mentioned, getting those antennas outside is going to make sure that there's less building materials to go through and a better direct line of sight to those different wireless sensors on your farm. So now I'm going to go through a few different poultry house layouts that we commonly see with our BarnTalk alarm system. So I'm going to start with a 4-house layout. So the easiest thing to just kind of think about when you're setting up the BarnTalk system on a poultry farm is that one gateway box can monitor 2 different houses. That's going to make sure that we have enough capacity for wireless sensors for each gateway, as well as usually those buildings are much longer than swine facilities. So that's going to make sure that we have strong connectivity for our wireless sensors in those houses. So in this case, we would have a gateway for each set of 2. So we can see here in this house, we have that gateway box connected. We have a wireless water meter for this house. We've got 2 wireless temp sensors and a wireless humidity sensor. In our other house, where we don't have the gateway located, we're going to use a wireless dry contact sensor to monitor power, as well as integrate in with the ventilation controller to be able to monitor power and get controller alarms from that standpoint. And then the same thing, we're going to use a wireless water meter, 2 wireless temp sensors, and a wireless humidity sensor to monitor those things on those houses. So essentially we have the exact replica of those 2 for each set of 2 houses. And that's going to be the best way to set those up in that particular situation. On the only other layout we might see occasionally is 3 separate houses on one. We have been able to get by with 1 gateway on some of those situations, but it's really important that you make sure that those antennas are outside, so that way you have good connectivity to those wireless sensors. And we wouldn't recommend going over 3 houses for 1 gateway to ensure that your wireless sensors have good, strong connectivity to that gateway communication box. This next layout is a little more complex. There's 8 separate poultry houses on this particular farm. And so we are going to use 4 total gateway boxes. And again, each gateway is going to cover 2 houses in that aspect. So it's going to be kind of like that 4-house site where, each gateway handling 2 houses. You're going to put a gateway in one house that's going to monitor power. The dry contact inputs in that gateway can monitor water pressure, ventilation controllers. In our second house, we're going to use that wireless dry contact sensor to monitor power, ventilation controllers, water pressure, etc. And then in this case, because these houses are pretty long, we're going to put 3 of those wireless temp sensors in each one of those houses, a wireless water meter in each house, and a wireless humidity sensor in each house. So we're essentially just going to replicate that 4 different times for each set of 2 on this particular layout. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what that would look like. The other thing that I would note as it relates to our antennas, particularly for the antennas that are communicating with the cellular network, we have had customers who are in areas that really, really struggle with cellular connection. And the antennas that we provide, they are able to pick up signal for a large majority of those sites. And I would say 95% plus of those sites with the standard equipment we provide are able to find good, strong connectivity when they get that cellular antenna outside. For those customers who are in areas where that standard equipment doesn't work, we do have booster antennas available, and those are have performed really well in those areas that really struggle with connectivity, and we've been pleased with that. So if the standard sensor and our cellular antenna just isn't quite cutting it, that booster antenna has been able to solve that issue for those customers. So keep that in mind if you're worried about cellular connectivity in some of those particular areas. And if you're a producer who has had some kind of alarm system that's connected to cellular, you know if that facility is going to need a little bit extra booster attention for that. So feel free to reach out to us and talk to us about what that looks like. So those are the different layouts that we wanted to cover today. Kelton, I don't know if we've had any questions come in, but I think that kind of gives folks a good idea of the different ways you can lay out those different farms and those facilities. As we kind of talked about at the beginning, each individual farm is laid out a little bit differently depending on when those buildings were built and possibly added on and expanded to. But for the most part, this is some of the most common layouts and sites that we see, and wanted to be able to provide you how we would recommend setting those up with the BarnTalk system.
Awesome. Yeah, we haven't had any questions come through. Lance, he gave you a shout out, said you're awesome. I gotta agree with Lance there.
Thanks, Lance.
And then also he just said to check your text message. He's gonna give you a direct line about his specific situation. Cool. So for those that are still with us, same goes for you. If you want to get a personalized quote for your specific site, I've thrown this number up on here. This is our sales line. We can connect you with one of our reps, and we can get this mapped out specifically for you and your situation. Drew, one question I had maybe as we were going through that is just best practices of placement of gateways. We showed a couple different ways throughout your presentation, but what would you say is like rule of thumb that you should do when setting up your gateway?
Yeah, I always tell folks that the gateway box is built for in-barn conditions. So it's going to be dust-proof, moisture-proof. However, I would always recommend it to put it near where your ventilation controllers are. In most cases, there's a specific control room or office where a lot of that electrical stuff is housed. And so that's where I would recommend putting the gateway box, and just kind of keep it in as clean of an environment as possible. Usually that is also going to be close to an external wall, or you might have a window, so that allows you to get those antennas outside, so you have strong connectivity to your sensors and to the cellular networks. But I would say that would probably be the main thing you would want to keep in mind as you're installing this on your farm.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions. We appreciate everybody taking the time today to watch our presentation. Again, as Drew mentioned, if you haven't yet, go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. We're doing these about bi-weekly, I'd say, that we do these webinars, and each time we're trying to specialize or focus on a specific part of the business. Today we did site layouts. In the past, we've done apps. So if you do have questions, if you want additional insights on other things that we can do for webinars, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll let you know when our next ones are coming up. So appreciate everyone's time and hope you have a great start to the new year.
Thanks, Kelton.
See you guys.